Let me ask you something most men are too afraid to admit out loud. You check your phone in the morning and there's nothing from her. Again, not a good morning, not a hey, thinking of you. Nothing. But the moment you reach out, she's right there responding, staying, never fully leaving. So she's not gone, but she's never coming toward you either. And right now, you're probably telling yourself one of two things. Either she's just not a texter, or maybe she's trying to play it cool. But what if neither of those stories is true? What if her silence is revealing something much deeper? Something about her psychology, and something even more uncomfortable about yours? Stay with me, because by the end of this video, you're going to understand exactly why this dynamic happens, why it quietly destroys attraction, and the 6 emotional shifts that completely change the way women respond to you. Before we go deeper, I want to introduce myself properly. I'm Lauren, and on this channel, we don't do surface-level dating advice. We talk about emotional patterns, attachment, attraction, masculine energy, female psychology, and the uncomfortable truths that most people avoid because they force you to look inward. And if you've ever found yourself overthinking a delayed text, replaying conversations in your head, or wondering why someone gives you just enough attention to keep you emotionally hooked, then this video is for you. But first, I want you to do something. I want you to be brutally honest with yourself for the next few minutes. Have you ever stared at your phone pretending you didn't care, while secretly hoping her name would pop up? Have you ever sent a casual text that wasn't casual at all? Have you ever convinced yourself to accept inconsistent effort because losing her felt scarier than losing your self-respect? If that hits you, comment, "I've been there" below. Seriously, because the moment you admit the pattern is the moment you stop being controlled by it. And while you're down there, like the video, not for the algorithm, for yourself, because awareness changes people. Most men stay trapped in this cycle for years without ever realizing what's actually happening. Here's the truth nobody tells you. This situation is rarely about texting. It's about emotional positioning. It's about who is emotionally chasing and who is emotionally choosing. And the dangerous part is that most men think the solution is to become more attractive, more attentive, more available, more understanding. But in reality, those things often make the problem worse, because attraction doesn't grow through emotional overextension. It grows through emotional balance. And this is where female psychology becomes important to understand. A woman doesn't emotionally lean toward a man because he constantly proves his worth. She leans toward him when she feels his presence without sensing desperation attached to it. That distinction changes everything. I want you to picture a man named Daniel. Daniel wakes up every morning and checks his phone before his feet even hit the floor. No text from her. His stomach drops just a little. Nothing dramatic, just enough discomfort to pull his focus away from himself and toward her. So he sends the first message. Again. Morning. Hope you slept well. She replies 3 hours later. Morning. That's it. And now Daniel's entire mood shifts. He rereads the message looking for hidden meaning. Was she dry because she's busy? Because she's losing interest? Because he texted too early? Too often? He starts adjusting himself emotionally around crumbs of attention. And here's what's tragic. Daniel thinks he's building connection, but what he's actually building is emotional dependence. That's the part men miss. Women are deeply intuitive when it comes to emotional energy. A woman may not consciously say, "This man is emotionally dependent on my responses," but she feels it. She feels when your mood rises and falls based on her attention. She feels when your nervous system is tied to her approval. And the moment she feels responsible for your emotional stability, attraction begins to weaken. Not because she's cold, not because she's manipulative, but because emotionally grounded energy feels safe, while emotionally dependent energy feels heavy. And this is why the first shift matters so much. Stop rewarding silence with more effort. I know that sounds harsh at first, but stay with me. Every time she pulls back and you immediately rush in with more texts, more check-ins, more reassurance. You remove all emotional responsibility from her side of the connection. Without realizing it, you teach her that she can give minimal effort while still receiving maximum attention from you. Human psychology works through reinforcement. What gets rewarded gets repeated. Think about it this way. If someone never had to water a plant because rain magically appeared every single day, eventually they'd stop valuing the plant entirely. Not because the plant lacks value, but because it required nothing from them emotionally. That's exactly what happens in many modern dating dynamics. The man becomes emotionally overavailable, predictable, constant, always there before she even has the chance to wonder about him. And what disappears when that happens? Curiosity, anticipation, emotional tension, the very things that create attraction. Now, let me be clear. I'm not telling you to ignore women. I'm not telling you to play manipulative games. Emotional maturity is not about punishment. It's about self-respect. There's a difference between chasing someone for connection and allowing someone the opportunity to step toward you willingly. And most men never allow that space to exist. They panic the moment silence appears. But silence is information. That sentence alone can change your life. Silence is information. If someone consistently values you, you will feel it in their effort, in their consistency, in their curiosity about your life, in their desire to maintain emotional contact without being forced into it. And if you're always initiating, always reviving dead conversations, always carrying the emotional weight of the connection, then you're not experiencing mutual interest. You're experiencing one-sided maintenance. That hurts to hear. I know, but clarity heals faster than confusion. And this is where I need you to pay close attention because the next mistake men make is the one that destroys attraction faster than almost anything else. Overgiving. Most men think attraction is built through intensity, more compliments, more effort, more availability, more emotional labor. But attraction doesn't thrive under pressure. It thrives under rhythm. Think about music for a second. What makes music beautiful isn't non-stop sound. It's contrast, space, pauses, timing. Relationships work the same way. When one person is constantly flooding the dynamic with effort while the other barely contributes, the emotional rhythm collapses. One person begins chasing while the other begins leaning away. And women feel this almost instantly. A woman can sense when a man's attention is freely given versus emotionally earned. One feels grounded, the other feels needy. Let me give you another example. A man spends all day thinking about her, sends her funny reels, checks in during lunch, double texts when she disappears, tries to keep the conversation alive at all costs. Meanwhile, she responds with short replies and little curiosity. Now, here's the dangerous part. Instead of pulling back and observing the imbalance, he increases effort because he believes effort creates value. But emotionally, she experiences something very different. Pressure, obligation, emotional crowding. And the more he tries to win her attention, the less natural attraction becomes. This is why matching energy is one of the most emotionally intelligent things a man can do. If she's warm, be warm. If she invests, invest. If she reaches out, reciprocate fully. But if she becomes distant, don't panic and sprint harder towards someone walking away slowly. That behavior communicates fear, not confidence. And women are incredibly sensitive to fear-based pursuit. A secure man doesn't chase harder when someone pulls away. He observes. He pays attention. He lets actions speak louder than fantasies. Because emotionally healthy men don't force connections into existence. They allow people to reveal themselves. That's the shift. And I know some of you are realizing something uncomfortable right now. Maybe this isn't just about her behavior. Maybe this pattern follows you into multiple relationships. Maybe you've spent years trying to earn consistency from emotionally unavailable people because deep down, inconsistency feels emotionally familiar. This is where psychology gets deep. Many men who become obsessed with mixed signals are not actually addicted to the woman. They're addicted to uncertainty. The emotional highs and lows trigger dopamine patterns similar to gambling. One warm text after hours of silence suddenly feels incredibly rewarding because your nervous system has been deprived. That's not love. That's intermittent reinforcement. And intermittent reinforcement creates some of the strongest emotional attachments in human psychology. Casinos know this. Social media apps know this. Emotionally inconsistent relationships operate the same way. You become emotionally hooked not because the connection is healthy, but because unpredictability keeps your nervous system engaged. That's why some men can't let go even when they know they're unhappy. The inconsistency itself becomes addictive. And once you understand that, you stop romanticizing emotional confusion. You stop calling anxiety chemistry. You stop calling breadcrumbs connection. You stop mistaking emotional instability for passion. And that realization changes everything. Because now we need to talk about the deepest shift of all. Emotional control. Most men think emotional control means suppressing feelings. It doesn't. It means not outsourcing your emotional state to someone else's behavior. That is a completely different thing. A man with emotional control can like someone deeply without becoming emotionally consumed by them. He can enjoy connection without abandoning himself inside it. He can handle uncertainty without spiraling. And women feel incredibly safe around that kind of energy. Why? Because emotional steadiness is rare. Most people today are emotionally reactive. One delayed text ruins their mood. One cold interaction creates panic. One moment of distance triggers overthinking. But grounded people operate differently. They don't interpret every silence as rejection. They don't build emotional catastrophes from incomplete information. They don't lose themselves trying to hold on to someone who isn't meeting them halfway. And the irony is, the less emotionally dependent you become, the more attractive you naturally feel. Not because you're pretending not to care, but because your identity no longer collapses around someone else's attention. That energy is magnetic. And we're going even deeper into the shifts that completely transform this dynamic, including why absence changes attraction, how to test genuine interest without manipulation, and the powerful reason raising your standards changes the type of women you attract entirely. And trust me, the next part is where everything clicks together. Before you leave, subscribe to Lauren Mind Game if you want more psychology-based relationship insights that actually change the way you think, feel, and show up in relationships. And tell me in the comments, what's the longest you've ever waited for a text from someone you couldn't stop thinking about? There's a moment every man remembers, even if he never admits it out loud. You send the text, then you wait. You put your phone down, try to focus on something else. Maybe even tell yourself you don't care that much. But a few minutes later, you check again. Nothing. Your brain starts filling in blanks that don't exist yet. Maybe she's losing interest. Maybe I said too much. Maybe she's talking to someone else. And suddenly, a simple delay becomes an emotional storm. What's fascinating is that most men think the pain comes from her silence, but psychologically, the pain is usually coming from the meaning they attach to it. That distinction matters. Because once you stop assigning your worth to someone's response time, you regain emotional power immediately. And this is where the fourth shift changes everything. Let absence do the work. Now, I need you to hear this carefully because insecure people misunderstand this advice all the time. Pulling back is not about manipulation. It's not about trying to make her miss you through games. It's about creating enough emotional space for reality to reveal itself. Because when you're constantly present, constantly texting, constantly initiating, constantly available, she never has the opportunity to feel your absence. And people rarely appreciate what never leaves. Think about this psychologically. The human brain notices contrast. We become emotionally aware of something when its presence changes. If your attention is endless, predictable, and automatic, eventually it blends into the background emotionally, not because you lack value, but because overexposure removes emotional tension. This is why emotionally healthy distance is important in every relationship. Not emotional punishment, not coldness. Space. Space allows curiosity to breathe. Space allows someone to move toward you voluntarily instead of simply responding to your constant presence. I worked with a client once who couldn't understand why a woman he was dating seemed less interested over time. He genuinely believed he was doing everything right. He texted consistently, complimented her constantly, made himself fully emotionally available. But when I asked him one question, everything changed. When was the last time she had the chance to wonder about you? He went silent. Because she never had to. He was always there. Before she could miss him, he texted. Before she could initiate, he reached out. Before emotional tension could naturally build, he erased it with reassurance. And the moment he stopped flooding the connection with effort, something interesting happened. She leaned forward. Not because he manipulated her, because for the first time, she had emotional room to participate. This is what men misunderstand about attraction. Attraction isn't built solely through pursuit. It's built through mutual emotional investment. And mutual investment requires space for both people to move toward each other. Now, let's address the uncomfortable truth many of you are avoiding. Some women won't move toward you even when you step back. And that truth hurts, but it's also freeing, because when you stop forcing momentum, you finally see whether the relationship has any momentum naturally. That's why the fifth shift matters so much. Test her interest, not through mind games, through observation. There's a huge difference. Most men are terrified to stop initiating because deep down they already know what silence might reveal. They fear that if they stop carrying the connection, it might collapse completely. But if a connection only survives through your constant effort, then you don't have a connection. You have maintenance. That realization changes lives. Imagine watering a dead plant every single day while convincing yourself it's still alive because one leaf remains green. That's what many men do emotionally in dating. They keep investing in minimal reciprocity because hope feels safer than acceptance. But emotionally mature people don't build relationships on potential. They build them on patterns, consistency, reciprocity, mutual enthusiasm. And here's something women rarely say directly but absolutely feel internally. A man who is willing to walk away from one-sided dynamics feels emotionally stronger than a man who tolerates emotional crumbs indefinitely. Why? Because self-respect is attractive, not arrogance, not ego, self-respect. A man who values himself does not beg to be chosen. He observes whether he is being chosen naturally. That energy changes how women perceive you entirely. And here's another important psychological layer most people ignore. Women often test emotional stability unconsciously, not through cruel manipulation, but through behavior. She may delay responses, pull back slightly, become inconsistent for a period of time. And what she's often subconsciously observing is this. Does this man remain emotionally grounded when he no longer has immediate reassurance? Or does he unravel? Does he become reactive, needy, anxious, over-pursuing? This is why emotional regulation matters so much in attraction. A grounded nervous system communicates safety, confidence, and maturity. An emotionally reactive nervous system communicates instability. And again, this doesn't mean suppressing emotion. It means managing it responsibly. One of the strongest things a man can say internally is this: if someone wants to drift away from my life, I will let them. Not because he lacks feelings, but because he understands that forced connection is not real connection. That mindset protects your peace, and peace is priceless. Which brings us to the final shift, the one that changes not just your dating life, but your entire sense of self. Raise your standards. This is where everything comes together, because eventually, you realize the issue isn't just that certain women don't initiate. The deeper issue is why you continue accepting dynamics that leave you emotionally starving in the first place. That question changes everything. Why do some men tolerate inconsistency for months, even years? Why do they cling to emotionally unavailable people while abandoning themselves in the process? Usually it comes down to fear. Fear of loneliness. Fear of not finding someone better. Fear that this partial connection is the best they'll ever get. And fear lowers standards faster than anything else. A man with low emotional standards will interpret breadcrumbs as intimacy. A man with healthy standards will recognize inconsistency early and calmly step away. That difference is life-changing. I want you to imagine two men dating the same woman. She barely initiates, rarely makes plans, gives inconsistent effort. The first man overthinks constantly. He explains away her behavior, tells himself she's busy, stressed, confused, healing. Not good at texting. He stays emotionally attached to potential instead of reality. The second man notices the same behavior and simply thinks, "This isn't enough for me." No anger, no bitterness, no obsession, just clarity. And that clarity protects his emotional health. Because standards are not about controlling other people, they're about deciding what access people get to you based on how they show up consistently. That is emotional maturity. The right woman will not leave you constantly confused about where you stand. She won't make you carry the entire emotional connection alone. She won't disappear emotionally while expecting you to remain fully invested. When a woman genuinely values you, effort becomes natural. Not forced, not strategic. Natural. And that's the relationship dynamic you should be building your life around. Not chasing, not convincing, not proving. Mutual desire, mutual investment, mutual peace. So, let's bring everything together. You stopped rewarding silence because your attention has value. You matched energy because healthy attraction requires emotional balance. You reclaimed emotional control because your worth is not determined by someone else's replies. You allowed absence to reveal truth instead of covering imbalance with endless effort. You tested interest through observation instead of fantasy. And finally, you raised your standards high enough to stop accepting emotional inconsistency as love. That's the transformation. And once you fully understand this, something powerful happens. Her silence stops controlling you. Because now silence is no longer rejection, it's information. And information creates clarity. The man who understands that becomes emotionally free. He no longer chases people who are emotionally unavailable. He no longer confuses anxiety with chemistry. He no longer abandons himself trying to keep someone else interested. And, ironically, that's usually when his relationships begin improving dramatically. Because emotionally grounded people attract differently. They choose differently. They walk away differently. And they love differently. If this video spoke to something deep inside you, subscribe to Lauren Mind Game right now, because every week we break down the psychology behind attraction, relationships, emotional intelligence, and human behavior in a way that helps you stop reacting emotionally and start seeing clearly. And before you go, I want you to answer this honestly in the comments. What's harder for you, letting go of someone who gives mixed signals, or admitting you deserved better the entire time? There's another truth most men don't realize until they've already lost themselves in the cycle. Sometimes it's not even the woman they're attached to anymore. It's the hope, the possibility, the fantasy of who she could become if she finally gave them the consistency they've been starving for. And that fantasy is powerful because the human mind will always cling harder to potential than reality when reality feels disappointing. Think about how many men stay emotionally attached to a woman based on 3 amazing conversations, while ignoring 3 months of emotional inconsistency. One late-night vulnerable phone call becomes enough to justify endless confusion. One affectionate moment suddenly outweighs repeated emotional distance, and the brain does something dangerous in those moments. It starts editing reality to protect attachment. That's why some of you watching this still replay the good moments in your head, even though deep down you know the connection leaves you anxious more than fulfilled. And I want to pause here for a second because this part matters deeply. If you've ever felt emotionally addicted to someone who gave you inconsistent attention, I need you to understand something clearly. You are not weak. You are human. Human beings are wired to chase emotional resolution. When someone gives you just enough affection to create hope, but not enough consistency to create security, your nervous system stays activated. It keeps searching for certainty. But real confidence comes from knowing you'll be okay even if someone walks away. Read that again mentally, because that's the kind of emotional security that changes relationships permanently. When you no longer fear losing people who fail to value you, you stop tolerating dynamics that slowly destroy your peace. And women can sense this almost immediately. There's a huge psychological difference between a man who says, "Please don't leave me," energetically, and a man whose energy says, "I care about you deeply, but I will not betray myself to keep you." One energy feels anxious, the other feels grounded. One asks for validation, the other communicates self-respect. And self-respect is one of the most attractive emotional traits any human being can have. Now, let's talk about something that almost nobody discusses honestly. Some women stay connected to men they don't fully want, not because they're evil, not because they consciously want to hurt anyone, but because attention feels good, emotional safety feels good, familiarity feels good. A woman may enjoy your presence, your validation, your consistency, your emotional availability, without actually feeling the level of attraction or investment needed for a deeper relationship. And many men stay trapped because they confuse access with desire. Just because she responds doesn't mean she's emotionally invested. Just because she keeps you around doesn't mean she's choosing you fully. That truth hurts. But accepting it protects you. Because once you stop romanticizing partial interest, you stop settling for half-hearted connection. And I need some of you to hear this next part very carefully. You cannot love someone into valuing you. You cannot overgive your way into being chosen. You cannot perform perfectly enough to make emotionally unavailable people suddenly become emotionally available. Real connection doesn't require constant convincing. It flows. Not perfectly. Not effortlessly all the time, but naturally. There's mutual curiosity, mutual effort, mutual emotional movement. And if you're carrying the entire connection alone, eventually exhaustion replaces attraction. That's why emotional boundaries matter so much. Boundaries are not walls, they are filters. They protect your peace from people who only show up halfway. A healthy boundary sounds like this internally. If someone consistently gives me confusion instead of clarity, I will stop investing so heavily. Not out of anger, out of self-respect. And the more emotionally mature you become, the more quickly you recognize when someone likes your attention more than they value your presence. That awareness saves years of emotional suffering, because life becomes lighter when you stop trying to force emotionally unavailable people to meet needs they were never prepared to meet. And let me tell you something powerful that happens when you finally internalize all 6 shifts from this video. You stop chasing.